Hey guys, tonight we're taking a slow stroll through a bustling medieval market fair. But don't worry, there's no rush. Imagine clanging bells, the whiff of boiled onions, a lute playing somewhere slightly off-key, and the low murmur of people haggling over dried fish and wool. You walk the rutted lane between colourful stalls, past barrels of pickled something, stepping over a suspicious puddle, while trying not to lock eyes with the guy juggling poultry. Now here's the twist, you're not just any visitor, you're part of this world, cloaked in scratchy wool, shoes stuffed with straw, coins jingling quietly in a pouch tied to your belt. The trumpets blare from the town gate, signalling the fair's start. You quickly remember, there are rules here, odd ones, ancient ones. Some you understand, others, well, you'll find out the hard way. You probably won't survive this without accidentally committing a dozen minor infractions. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. I always love seeing how far these sleepy strolls travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through the fair gate just as the trumpet fanfare dies down. These aren't shiny brass instruments gleaming in the sun. Think dented, vaguely threatening iron tubes honking from the rampart above. It's loud, clumsy, and designed to get your attention, not entertain. The sound is followed by a town crier barking a reminder. The fair is officially open, and all participants are now subject to the fair's customs and laws, which in theory you already knew. In practice, you're probably violating 3 of them just by where you're standing. This isn't some chaotic free-for-all. Medieval market fairs are deeply, weirdly organised. From the moment you enter, you're stepping into a legally protected micro-universe, a pop-up economy with its own courts, guards, measurement inspectors, and in some cases, literal booklets of rules carried around by enforcers in thick boots and questionable hats. The first trumpet wasn't for you specifically, it was to announce that the king's protection has officially descended upon the grounds. Yes, you're now in a space where the king, or more often his local representative, guarantees peace. Nobody can arrest you for debts. You can't be drafted into military service while trading. Even the private feuds are supposed to pause here. It's like the medieval version of airport diplomatic immunity, except if you pickpocket someone, the fair guards will still cheerfully beat you with a stick. Historians still argue whether this early practice of fair privilege grew out of necessity, traders wouldn't come without safety, or whether it was a sneaky way for rulers to siphon off taxes while pretending to play host. Either way, the arrangement is now set in stone, or more accurately parchment. You spot one such parchment nailed crookedly to a wooden post near the gate. It's partly obscured by a chicken and smells faintly of vinegar, but it's there. The official charter, sealed, witnessed, and definitely ignored by half the people here. The trumpets are only the beginning. Every hour has its noise. At midday, a bell will ring to mark the start of licensed food selling. At dusk, another trumpet reminds everyone to extinguish open fires or risk a fine. And at the very end of the fair, expect a solemn clanging procession of bells and hornblowers as the market is declared officially closed. Until then, the sounds guide you like a very confused symphony of public service announcements. As you move further in, you pass under a cloth banner awkwardly stretched between 2 crooked beams. Someone tried to paint a lion on it. It looks more like a disapproving dog. Beneath it, traders from the next county over argue with a local reeve about whether their cartload of turnips qualifies for the entry fee discount promised by a baron 20 years ago. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. You feel a soft tug on your sleeve. A child offers you something that looks like a boiled sweet, wrapped in what might be waxed linen. You decline politely. It's probably safe. Probably. Near the centre of the fairground, there's a raised wooden platform. It's not a stage for jugglers, though they will later sneak up there when nobody's looking. It's the proclamation stand. Every morning of the fair, officials gather to read the rules aloud. The same rules, every single day, because repetition apparently is more reliable than trust. You listen in as today's proclamation ends with a final reminder. No sharp tools shall be wielded in anger, no wool shall be passed as fleece, and no one shall defame another's pickled goods without proof. Yes, that last one's real. There was a whole lawsuit once. The fair isn't just about buying and selling, it's about ritual. Rules, pageantry, and spectacle matter. The trumpet fanfare, the posted parchment, the official readings. They aren't decorative. They're the fair saying, this is not the wild countryside, this is order in a tent. Still, not everyone plays by those rules. As you make your way toward the meat stalls, you spot two merchants arguing over a marked line in the dirt. That line apparently separates one jurisdiction from another. One merchant is under the town's laws, the other falls under the Lord's Charter. They're selling the same salted herring, but the taxes differ, and naturally each insists they're the one who deserves the better rate. A local officer watches from a stool, chewing slowly on what might be a fig. He says nothing. He's seen this exact argument before, last week. One last note before we drift further into the chaos. Beneath the horns and laws and banners, this is still just a field, one that probably hosted sheep last month. It smells like trampled grass and roast onions. There's mud in places mud should never be. Your shoes already regret this. But you're here now. The fair has begun. The rules have been announced. And you, dear visitor, are officially a participant in one of history's most oddly regulated economic experiments. Welcome. You wander toward that crooked parchment posted near the gate, now flapping slightly in the breeze like it's trying to escape its own legal obligations. It's the fair's charter, the document that makes everything here possible. Without it, this whole gathering would be nothing more than an illegal street party with turnips. With it, though, the fair is sanctioned, regulated, and protected under royal authority. Or at least that's the sales pitch. Charters weren't just fancy pieces of parchment with seals and calligraphy. They were deeply practical instruments, outlining who could sell what, when, where, and under which set of rules. And you're bound by them now whether or not you've read the fine print. Which, to be honest, you haven't. No one has, not even the guy who wrote it. According to this charter, which dates back to, let's say, the reign of Henry III, today's fair is allowed to run for precisely 7 days, beginning at sunrise on the feast of St. Leonard. And no, the exact date of that feast changes depending on whether you're using the Julian calendar or whichever improvised local system the monks felt like endorsing that year. Either way, you're in the clear for the next 6 days, assuming you don't break any rules, or at least don't get caught. The charter doesn't just give permission, it grants rights and responsibilities. Only certain goods can be sold and only by certain people. You try to buy imported spices from a travelling merchant, but he's being harassed by a town official because he hasn't paid for a stallage license, which is apparently a real thing. That license costs a few silver pennies and allows you to physically occupy a patch of mud with your tent, table, and extremely overpriced dried figs. Historians still argue whether these charters genuinely encouraged free trade or simply allowed local lords to create monopolies disguised as public service. Either way, once that parchment is nailed to the gatepost, the town transforms into a temporary jurisdiction of its own. You pass a group of local cloth merchants huddled in frustration. According to the charter, only recognised guildsmen may sell dyed wool during the fair. Problem is, half of them forgot their guild tokens at home. One man insists that his dog ate his badge. The reeve is unmoved. These rules weren't just economic. Charters included social boundaries too. For example, at some fairs, women were technically prohibited from running stalls unless they were widows, nuns, or women of standing. A category so vague it could mean anything from landowner to my cousin works in the castle kitchen. You notice an elderly woman selling candles, defiantly ignoring a younger man who keeps pointing to the charter and whispering loudly. She sells 4 candles in the time he takes to find a guard. You decide to buy one yourself, partly out of solidarity, partly because it smells like actual beeswax and less like goat. At the far end of the main path, a raised wooden table acts as the fair's command centre. There's a copy of the charter kept here, locked in a chest that, in true medieval fashion, requires 3 different keys, held by 3 different men who rarely show up at the same time. It's a ceremonial thing, like most things here. Theoretically, you could file a grievance with the fair's governing body if you feel a merchant shortchanged you, but only if your complaint aligns with the exact charter language. Spoiler, it doesn't. You eavesdrop on a young scribe explaining to a group of confused Flemish traders that their goods, fancy dyed ribbons, fall under the foreign luxury category, which means they need to pay double stallage and submit an inventory. One of them simply walks away, muttering what you can only assume are medieval Flemish curse words. The other sighs and begins the paperwork, dabbing his quill in a tiny pot of ink strapped to his belt. Respect. What makes this all more confusing is that no 2 charters are exactly the same. A fair in York might prohibit the sale of eels, while the one in Norwich practically floats on the stuff. One town bans dice games entirely, another allows them as long as they're played before noon and under supervision by the local priest. You pass a booth selling tiny bones and wonder aloud, game pieces or soup ingredients. The seller just smiles. A charmed moment. A child tugs on her father's sleeve, pointing to the charter and asking what it says. The father leans in and reads aloud. No oxen shall be shod within 20 paces of the church. The girl nods solemnly. This is important knowledge. Some charters included rules about behaviour, cleanliness, and even timekeeping. In one famously dense charter from 1274, the fair in St. Yves insisted that traders must leave a clear space between stalls, no less than the breadth of one swine. Which begs the question, whose swine? You now understand why some traders brought pigs along not to sell, but to measure stall width. You begin to understand that these fairs, far from being unruly pop-up bazaars, were legal marvels in their own peculiar way. The charters allowed for regulation, but also created endless loopholes. A brewer might be banned from selling strong ale, but nothing stops him from selling fortified broth at a separate table. A cheese merchant prohibited from trading directly can pay a local boy to hold the cheese and give it away for donations. You see one such boy now, proudly proclaiming the cheese is free, as long as you also buy his pebble collection. At this point your brain feels slightly taxed by all the rules. It's like trying to attend a festival while also studying for a law exam. But even in your confusion, there's something reassuring about the order beneath the madness. Every stall, every trader, every transaction exists because someone, somewhere, wrote it down and got it stamped with wax. And just as you're about to sit down on a bale of hay and contemplate the logistics of medieval cheese smuggling, the bell rings again. Another hour passes, another rule enforced. Somewhere someone is getting fined for using the wrong type of tent peg. Welcome to the world of chartered chaos, and you've only just arrived. You wander a little deeper into the fair, and suddenly you find yourself face to face with a man holding a lump of cheese in one hand and a small brass weight in the other. He's not buying, and he's definitely not snacking, he's inspecting. Because here, in this odd little world of banners and onions, weights and measures are serious business. The town's official clerk of the market, a very grand title for a man whose main job is to prevent cheating, is making his rounds. He carries a set of standardized weights, polished smooth by years of suspicious loaves and questionable sacks of grain. You pause to watch as he plunks one onto a hanging scale. The cheese wobbles. The merchant, whose hands are suspiciously floury for a cheese seller, offers an unconvincing smile. Turns out that in medieval market fairs, having the wrong weight wasn't just frowned upon, it was punishable. The clerk sniffs the cheese, scribbles something on a wax tablet, and moves along. The merchant exhales. Apparently he passed. This time. You might be wondering, why all the fuss? After all, aren't markets supposed to be a little chaotic? Little bargaining here, a little haggling there. Well, yes, but also very much no. In this world, balance matters, literally. Official town weights, sometimes made of iron, sometimes lead, were kept under lock and key, often in a chest with a double seal. If you were caught using lighter weights or tampered scales, the penalties range from public shaming to the confiscation of goods. There are even records of traders being forced to stand in the stocks with a faulty weight hanging around their neck. Medieval performance art at its most passive-aggressive. Historians still argue whether the obsession with weight regulation stemmed from genuine fairness or simply a clever way for towns to impose fines and raise income. Probably both. You duck into the shade of a linen tent where a woman is selling herbs. She offers you a small pouch of dried lavender, and you notice her scale is a delicate balance of string and brass. She gives you a wink. "Don't worry," she says. "Mine's been approved. Last Tuesday. The lavender smells heavenly." You buy it, partly for the scent, partly because you respect her hustle. Behind her, a cart laden with apples creaks to a halt. A second inspector appears, this one carrying a wooden stick marked with hand-carved notches, the local measure for cloth and length-based goods. He's not here for apples, though. He's checking the linen being sold next door. Turns out that some merchants have been cutting corners, or more accurately cutting inches. You're starting to see a pattern. Almost every category of goods has its own measurement and its own opportunity for mischief. Cloth merchants, for instance, were known to wet their bolts of wool so they'd weigh more. Bakers sometimes hollowed out loaves from the inside. Brewers diluted ale with pond water, which, let's be honest, was already the default flavour. In 1266, England passed the Assize of Bread and Ale, which regulated not just the weight of loaves but also their price, based on the cost of wheat. There's even a tale, possibly apocryphal, about a baker caught short measuring who was rolled through the town in a cart full of crumbs. Dramatic? Yes. Effective? Definitely. You eye the bread stall more carefully now. At one fair in Ghent, records show that a rogue butter merchant was caught using hollowed-out barrels with false bottoms. The town response? Confiscate the butter and give it away to the poor. You wonder if that was really justice or just a convenient lunch. A child rushes past you, nearly knocking over a crate of onions. The vendor sighs and reweighs the stack. She mutters something about last year's rules being better. Apparently each fair sometimes adjusted the standards slightly, enough to cause confusion, but not enough to get out of enforcement. You step away carefully. You're not ready to be blamed for an onion-related scandal. There's a faint metallic clink nearby. A man in a pointed cap is testing coins, biting them, weighing them, and occasionally rejecting them with a grunt. Coinage wasn't standardized across regions, and fair charters often included clauses about what kinds of currency were acceptable. At some fairs, only local coins could be used, and foreign merchants had to exchange theirs at the town's rate, which, of course, always leaned conveniently in the town's favour. You try to pay for a roasted turnip skewer with a silver groat, but the seller frowns. Only pennies, she says, waving vaguely at a nearby exchange booth. There, two extremely bored-looking men are debating whether your coin is clipped. You quietly retreat. Maybe the lavender pouch was enough shopping for now. Still, there's something oddly charming about the whole system. Everyone here, traders, inspectors, buyers, plays their part in a dance of mutual suspicion and reluctant trust. There are rules, they are mostly enforced, and somewhere beneath the surface-level grumbling, everyone seems to understand that this fragile system is what allows the fair to function at all. You pass a group of traders chatting in low tones about a scandal last week. A man selling peppercorns by the handful rather than by weight. "Madness," one whispers. "Pure anarchy." You nod solemnly. Nothing says medieval rebellion like unmeasured spices. A bell rings softly from the centre of the fair. Not the big trumpet. This is gentler, like a reminder. Means the afternoon inspections are starting. Clerks and reeves move out in pairs, clipboards, well, waxboards in hand. Somewhere, a man selling salted eels has just realised he forgot to calibrate his scale this morning. Somewhere else, someone is pretending not to notice, and you're learning the ropes. You start to understand that these rules, while fussy, are what give the fair its rhythm. They're not just about stopping cheaters. They're about making sure everyone, from the wool merchant to the child with a single penny, has a fair shot at not being swindled. Just don't try to pass off a pebble as a silver penny. Someone already did that. They're still in the stocks. As you navigate past the cloth stalls and the pungent cheese carts, a loud shout cuts through the air. Two men, red-faced and wild-eyed, are pointing fingers at each other over what appears to be a single broken spindle. One's a wool merchant, the other a carter who knocked over the stall's display. Voices rise, a small crowd forms, and just when things are about to boil over into an all-out beat-throwing incident, someone mutters a single phrase, "Take it to the pie powder court." You hear that word again, pie powder. You'd heard whispers of it earlier, but now curiosity gets the better of you. You follow the crowd to a small wooden table under a canvas awning at the edge of the fair, beside a tent selling suspiciously shiny fish. There, seated behind a collection of ink pots and a scale of justice that looks more decorative than functional, is the fair's makeshift judiciary. No wigs, no gavels, just 3 dusty officials and one very unimpressed clerk. The name pie powder doesn't come from any culinary delight, sadly. It's derived from the French pieds poudrés, dusty feet, a nod to the travelling nature of the merchants and the pop-up justice system that followed them. These courts were uniquely medieval, fast, local, and wildly improvised. Forget the multi-year lawsuits of modernity. Here, disputes are handled in hours, sometimes minutes. Think of it as the express checkout lane of medieval law. The wool merchant presents his case with dramatic flair, arms flailing like a minstrel mid-ballad. The carter responds by pointing to his donkey, as if that somehow explains everything. The judges exchange looks, scribble furiously, and within 10 minutes they reach a verdict. The spindle was cheap, the carter was careless, and they both owe a small fine. Justice medieval style. Historians still argue whether pie powder courts were truly fair or simply designed to keep the peace quickly, with minimal paperwork. But they were undeniably practical. You couldn't expect traders from Flanders, Florence, or Frankfurt to come all this way just to spend 3 weeks stuck in a courtroom. These fairs had to move fast, and so did their courts. One clerk waves a hand and scribbles the judgment into a large leather-bound book. The loser of the case, a man with an unfortunate resemblance to a damp stoat, is required to pay compensation in the form of 3 coins and an extra wheel of questionable cheese. He stomps off muttering, "Case closed." You edge closer to the court tent and see the logbook up close. The entries are oddly poetic. Complaint brought forth by John of Ox against Willem the Younger for stepping upon his wares with force unbecoming a man of trade. You imagine modern court transcripts written with such flair. Your Honour, the defendant did with great indifference smush the plaintiff's eclairs. Some fairs had permanent pie powder courts, especially the larger ones like those in St. Ives or Stamford. Others set them up temporarily, a few rickety benches and a table dragged into place beside the meat stalls. Judges were often town bailiffs or local gentry with a vague understanding of both the law and how not to be stabbed by angry merchants. The best part? These courts were mobile. If a dispute broke out between, say, 2 spice traders midway down the fair lane, the court could simply show up. A clerk, a judge, and the requisite wax seal, all arriving like a travelling improv troupe, but with fines instead of punchlines. You watch a second case unfold. This time it's between a brewer and a buyer, who claims the ale gave him a rash. The brewer insists the man drank it too quickly, and probably ate a questionable sausage beforehand. The court listens, mostly with raised eyebrows, and ultimately decides in favour of the brewer. A small note is made. No recompense. Ale deemed fair. Rash unrelated. Justice is apparently also dermatological. There's a scholarly debate about how binding these rulings were. Some historians believe they held the same weight as any town court. Others argue that pie powder rulings were more like strongly worded suggestions backed by peer pressure and the threat of public embarrassment. Regardless, people seem to abide by them, partly out of fear, partly out of tradition, mostly because it was better than dragging the argument home and stewing over it for 6 months. You notice that the court officials all wear similar badges, small medallions stamped with the fair's emblem. One wears his proudly on a chain, another has it pinned to his belt like a reluctant concession. It signifies their role as temporary arbiters of law, and also gives them the right to eat for free at certain food stalls. Not all perks are created equal. The court is quiet again, for now. A child selling ribbons tries to bring a case against a pig that stole her lunch, but the judges politely decline. Animals not being of legal mind, one explains, cannot be held accountable. The pig, oblivious, trots past, holding what might have once been a meat pie. You wander away, thinking how strange it is that a dusty corner of the fair hosts one of its most crucial systems. Without the pie powder courts, disputes would fester, tempers would flare, and eventually someone would end up dramatically flinging pickled herring at their enemies. The courts might be quirky, but they keep the fair running smoothly, or at least with slightly fewer poultry-related crimes. And as you pass by the spindle booth again, the wool merchant is already repairing his display, while the carter cheerfully hands out samples of apples to anyone who looks remotely hungry. The case is over. Life and business goes on. You smile. Maybe dusty feet make for clean slates after all. The sun peeks out from behind a sooty cloud as you cross a rickety wooden bridge, spanning a trickle of muddy water, and there it is. The toll booth. Not a booth exactly, more like a table, a large ledger, a very tired-looking man with ink-stained fingers and a hand-painted sign that reads, "No cart enters without fee." The fee, of course, is variable, vaguely defined and always subject to negotiation, unless you're unfortunate enough to be carrying hay. Then it's mysteriously double. Tolls at medieval fairs were serious business. You've already heard whispers about them from other merchants grumbling over their breakfast turnips. This wasn't just about paying to enter the fairground. It was about what you brought, how much and how many wheels were on your cart. Yes, wheels, 4 wheels. That'll be a few extra pennies. 2 wheels, still a fee, but slightly less. No wheels? Oh, you're carrying it yourself. You poor soul. You may pass. The man ahead of you in line has a cart full of geese, which honk angrily at everyone in a 5-meter radius. He tries to argue that birds shouldn't count as cargo, since they're technically self-transporting. The toll officer, without looking up, mutters, "If they poop on the road, they're cargo." You quietly applaud this logic and take a step back. Historians still argue whether these tolls were set in stone or made up on the spot by cunning gatekeepers. Some towns had official rates posted penned in Latin, of course, and incomprehensible to most. Others operated more flexibly. The term murage was used when the toll was supposed to fund town walls. Pavage meant it was for paving streets. There was even pontage for bridges, but whether the money ever actually reached the stones or stayed in the toll collector's pouch is, well, a bit of a murky puddle. You finally reach the table. You're not pulling a cart, thankfully. Just a modest linen bag with herbs and a few beeswax candles. The clerk eyes your goods, rubs his chin and says, 2 farthings. Unless those candles are scented, then it's 3. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. My wife gets headaches. Fair enough. Next to the toll station is a chalkboard, updated each morning with the special rates of the day. Today, Oxen are cheap to bring in, but goats are suspiciously expensive. A nearby merchant speculates that someone's uncle was bitten by a goat last week. The goat in question stands nearby, chewing on someone's hat. You take a moment to study the actual record book the toll clerk keeps. It's a mess of lines, numbers, and odd annotations. One entry reads, 3 carts, 2 with wheels, 1 possibly cursed charged double. Another, miller with pig and bag of flour allowed in free due to rain. You wonder if any of this will make sense when reviewed later. Probably not. But the point is not accuracy, it's control. The booth doesn't just track goods coming into the fair, it also watches what goes out. Exiting merchants are sometimes searched to ensure they're not sneaking away without paying stolage or taxes. There's a rumour whispered behind hay bales that one merchant tried to smuggle out a dozen silver goblets inside a side of pork. Whether that's true or just a favourite tale of bored toll-keepers is anyone's guess. At some larger fairs, especially in France and the Low Countries, the toll operation was massive. Guards patrolled the edges of the grounds, looking for sly vendors who tried to sneak in over ditches or through hedgerows. One fair even employed geese as early warning systems. Their honks alerted guards to movement in the brush. You imagine a medieval merchant being thwarted by a squadron of angry geese. It's oddly satisfying. You watch a group of monks approach the toll booth, their cart filled with flasks and tightly sealed barrels. Holy water, they explain. The clerk raises an eyebrow, but waves them through. One of the monks winks at you. You suspect that water might have a higher proof than advertised. Nearby, an old woman is arguing furiously with a toll assistant over a bundle of wool. She insists it's for personal use. He insists it's definitely commercial. Who needs that much wool for a single tunic? He asks. A cold person, she growls back. Eventually she pays a half-farthing and stomps off triumphantly. You make a mental note. Never challenge an elderly weaver before her morning ale. These tolls, while annoying to merchants, served a purpose. They helped fund the infrastructure of the fair, cleaning, policing, even the trumpet players you heard this morning. Some of that money, at least theoretically, went to fixing bridges and maintaining roads, though the puddle you nearly slipped in earlier tells a different story. There were exceptions, of course. Nobles and knights were often exempt from tolls, especially if they travelled with retinues. Foreign merchants with special charters could negotiate better rates. One Flemish trader boasts loudly about how he only paid a single groat for an entire wagon of velvet. His cart creaks ominously behind him, threatening to collapse under the weight of that velvet privilege. You notice that, while most people grumble, they still pay. The fair, despite its chaos, depends on these tolls. They're part of the rhythm, like the bells, the inspections and the pie powder rulings. They're annoying, yes, but they're also part of the unspoken agreement that keeps this entire muddy, smelly, magnificent machine moving. And as you move on past the booth, your pockets lighter, your candle supply slightly more expensive, you take one last glance at the toll clerk's ledger. He's already scribbling the next entry, one traveller, quiet, possibly asleep standing up, charged full rate anyway. He doesn't look up. You smile and keep walking. Not long after escaping the toll clerk and his suspicious surcharge on scented goods, you find yourself drifting toward the heart of the fair, where the music is loudest, the air thickest with roasted meat and beeswax, and the crowd densest. This is where things get official. You're about to learn what it means to be a badged person. And no, it's not a medieval fan club. It's the key to everything. A burly man with a red sash blocks your path. Badge? He grunts. You blink. You have a pouch, a hood, a mild sunburn, and a vague sense of entitlement. But no badge. Then no stall, no selling, no shouting prices, he declares. You nod, slowly backing away, and decide to observe instead. These badges aren't ornamental. They're your license to exist here as anything other than a customer. Without one, you're not allowed to set up shop, hawk wares, or even help someone else do it. And these rules are strictly enforced. especially by the guilds. You finally spot someone getting their badge, an apprentice candle maker, no older than 14, nervously tying a wooden disc to his belt. The badge is stamped with the symbol of the Wax Guild, 3 hives and a flame, and confirms that he's been approved by the guild to sell. You ask him what the badge means. It means, he says with a sheepish grin, they won't throw me out if I light the candles wrong. In many fairs, especially the big ones, like those at Troyes, Frankfurt or St. Ives, badges were issued by both the guilds and the fair authorities, and sometimes, just to make things interesting, you needed both. The guild's badge said you knew what you were doing. The fair's badge said you'd paid for the right to do it here. Historians still debate how much of this was about maintaining quality versus maintaining power. Was it to prevent fraud, or just to make sure no outsider could threaten local monopolies? The answer, as usual in the Middle Ages, is yes. You wander past a tent draped in dyed wool, where a cloth merchant proudly displays 5 different badges, 2 from local guilds, 1 from his home city in Brabant, 1 from the fair's steward, and 1 that appears to be decorative. It features a goose in armour. You don't ask. Badges weren't always simple discs. Some were stitched patches, others engraved tokens of lead, pewter or even bone. At particularly religious fairs you might receive a pilgrim badge instead, blessed by the church and doubling as a souvenir. Of course, that didn't stop people from selling fakes. You pass a man hawking authentic badges from Rome. One features a slightly crooked St. Peter giving a thumbs up. In England, badge systems became especially elaborate. At the famed Bartholomew Fair in London, traders had to display stall numbers, badges, and in some cases written proof of prior participation. You think wistfully of simpler times, like 15 minutes ago. Not everyone loves the badge system. A barefoot woman selling herbal salves has no token. She sits slightly outside the official row of stalls, and when you ask why, she mutters something about not being able to afford the guild dues. They say I'm not qualified, she says, but I've cured more coughs than that butter-faced apothecary ever will. She gives you a sample that smells vaguely of thyme and vinegar. You thank her and move on before someone spots the unlicensed transaction. Nearby, a guild official, easily identified by his enormous fur hat and the way everyone avoids eye contact, approaches a shoemaker's stall. He examines the man's badge, checks his wares, and then sniffs a pair of boots. Literally, you watch in silent awe. The boots pass the sniff test, and the official moves on. At some fairs, badges even dictated where you could sell. Premium stall spots were reserved for fully badged master craftsmen. Apprentices, you're in the mud near the latrine trench. No badge at all. Hope you enjoy yelling from outside the main fairground, where the goats graze and the customers rarely wander. One scholar writing about Flemish fairs described the badge system as a choreographed economic ballet, where every participant's movement was limited by their insignia. Another historian called it economic gatekeeping with flair. You like both descriptions, especially the ballet part. You imagine traders pirouetting past each other, badges fluttering and guild officials throwing roses or fines. A tense moment arises when a badge dispute breaks out between 2 neighbouring candle makers. One claims the other's badge is outdated, issued last year, and thus invalid. The accused insists that he renewed it, but the ink washed off in the rain. A small crowd gathers. The reeve arrives, inspects the badge, and shrugs. Looks fine to me. The accuser fumes. You quietly buy a candle from the accused out of sheer spite. It smells like honey and passive aggression. There's a humorous local story you hear while sipping watered wine near the textiles tent. Last year, someone forged a dozen badges using carved potatoes. They passed inspection for 2 days before someone noticed the suspicious starch residue. You don't know if the story is true, but it definitely made your day. Badges didn't only serve economic purposes. They also acted as identifiers. In case of dispute, theft or missing goods, your badge number could be traced. Sort of. Assuming someone wrote it down. Assuming someone could read. Still added a layer of order to the medieval chaos stew. You pass a booth selling musical instruments. The lute vendor wears his badge like a medal. "I earned this," he tells anyone who'll listen. 4 generations of luthiers. He's barely 30. But you don't challenge him. As the sun begins to lower, the light catching on hundreds of glinting tokens, you start to notice how much quieter the enforcement has become. The badge checkers have taken their supper breaks. The reeves are distracted by something involving a runaway barrel. For now, the fair breathes easier, but everyone still wears their badges. Because here, it's not just about selling, it's about being seen as someone who belongs. You straighten your pouch and make a mental note. Tomorrow, maybe you'll find someone selling badges under the table. Surely there's a loophole. You wake to the smell of stale beer, roasting onions, and authority. The fair has barely rubbed the sleep from its eyes, but the guild officers are already on patrol. You spot them immediately. Men and women in fine cloaks bearing embroidered emblems, their belts jingling with keys, wax stamps, and the kind of smug confidence only someone with licensing power can possess. Guilds are the invisible scaffolding of this place. You might think a market fair is just chaos and commerce, but behind every wedge of cheese, bolt of cloth, or squeaky boot lies a network of powerful associations making sure no one gets away with selling subpar sausage. As you nibble a piece of bread that tastes suspiciously like last night's air, you find yourself walking into the jurisdiction of the Shoemakers Guild, or at least that's what the large wooden sign above the stall says. Approved by the Honourable Company of Cordwainers. The vendor beams at you. "Only guild-approved leather," he chirps, holding up a shoe like a trophy. Guild watchdogs weren't just fussy middlemen. They were enforcers, regulators, and let's face it, a little bit nosy. They had the right to inspect goods, question sellers, and even confiscate wares that didn't meet the guild's standards. And the standards were very, very specific. You pass a soapmaker's tent, where 2 officials are loudly debating whether the lye content of the product exceeds the sting threshold. A woman with sudsy hands rolls her eyes. "It's for laundry, not for faces," she mutters, before returning to scrubbing a surprisingly ornate tunic. Historians still argue whether guilds genuinely protected consumers or simply protected their own monopolies. Probably both. But one thing is clear. They had teeth, and they used them. Guilds enforced not just quality, but also territory. Each section of the fairground is subtly divided. Fishmongers here, apothecaries there, coopers around the bend. You wander into the metalworkers' lane, and are quickly asked to leave. Apparently, non-members have to pay a viewing fee if they linger too long. You blink. The rule is entirely made up, but the delivery is so confident you pay the penny. There's even a guild for tent makers. You find this out when one collapses in front of you, and a very red-faced man insists he only rented it under duress from a non-guild provider. You get what you pay for. A nearby tent maker sniffs, hammering in a peg with the pride of a blacksmith forging a sword. You notice apprentices wearing stripes on their sleeves. 1 stripe means beginner, 2 means journeyman, 3 means please stop asking me how much thread is on the spool. These ranks are strictly enforced, and each level determines what you can sell, how much you can charge, and where you're allowed to stand. You meet a young weaver named Elsie, who's thrilled to have earned her 2nd stripe. "I get to stand under the awning now," she says, beaming. "Last year I was out in the rain." You congratulate her with a half-eaten plum. A group of foreign traders from Genoa are having a very animated discussion with a local dye guild. The Genoese are selling indigo-dyed cloth, which the locals argue undercuts the price of woad, the traditional blue of the region. The argument ends with both sides agreeing to a strange compromise. The Genoese can sell their cloth only on odd-numbered days, in a tent that must fly a yellow flag to warn woad customers. You'll decide that's enough economics for the morning, and slip away. You overhear a travelling juggler complain that the Entertainers Guild is charging him background music tax. Apparently, if a nearby minstrel performs while you juggle, you're supposed to pay for the auditory ambience. It was just a lute noodle. The juggler protests. No one cares. One quirky case from a past fair floats back to you. Someone tried to sell pre-cooked pies without guild approval. Not only were the pies confiscated, but the seller was forced to sit next to his cart wearing a sign that read, "Pie Traitor." Apparently he leaned into the punishment and started offering illicit pies for free samples. Business boomed. The guild was not amused. You come across a stall selling felt hats, each more colourful than the last. The vendor proudly waves a scroll, a travelling licence from his guild back home. Not only does it prove his craft, it also grants him immunity from local hat guild inspections for exactly 48 hours. "I've got till sunset tomorrow," he says, eyes darting toward a pair of looming guild officers, sniffing a nearby bonnet. In some parts of the fair, the guilds even regulate prices. Bread, candles, thread, fixed costs posted on parchment, nailed to wooden boards. Undercutting isn't just frowned upon, it's actionable. You watch a soap seller get fined for offering a buy one get half a crumb free deal. Clever, but not clever enough. There's a scholarly debate about whether guilds stifled innovation by enforcing tradition. Why try a new candle formula when the old one is guild approved and safe? But then again, the last time someone used pine resin instead of beeswax, they lit a customer's hair on fire, so maybe there's something to be said for rules. Still, there's no denying the guilds gave medieval fairs structure. They offered a guarantee, buy from a badged booth, and you're less likely to get food poisoning or boot rot. It's the medieval version of a blue check mark. Verified seller, official member, slightly less shady. You loop back around and find Elsie again. She's made her first sale of the day. A modest linen handkerchief with embroidered thistles. The buyer inspects the stitching and nods. "Guild work," he says approvingly. You give her a quiet thumbs up. She waves, her stripe glinting in the sun. The fair would be chaos without the guilds. It's already teetering on the edge of madness with its mud and music and livestock everywhere. But these cloaked watchdogs, for all their quirks and fines, give the whole thing shape. And as you pass a man carving spoons under the watchful eye of the Woodworkers Guild, you find yourself oddly comforted. Maybe it's good someone's keeping score. Even if the scorekeeper sometimes sniffs boots for a living. You've just ducked out of the guild lane, your brain slightly fried from all the badge watching and boot sniffing, when a strange hush settles over the crowd. You pause. It's not silence exactly, but a lowering of volume. Like the fair has collectively exhaled. Someone is pointing at the sky. Others are gesturing toward a clock tower. Then, from high above, a bell tolls. And just like that, the music stops. Literally. It's curfew, but not for you. Not yet. This, dear wanderer, is the noise curfew. One of the lesser-known, delightfully specific, and strangely enforced rules of medieval market fairs. You walk along a lane now noticeably dimmer in mood. Minstrels begin packing up lutes and recorders. Jesters wrangle juggling pins back into sacks, and that one guy who's been reciting questionable poetry about pickled eggs suddenly forgets his rhymes. The fair isn't closing. Trade is still allowed, torches are still lit, and the meat is very much still sizzling. But now at dusk the entertainment must hush. No loud songs, no bellowing vendors, and definitely no loud drumming. Which you find out the hard way when a child bangs a pot and is immediately shushed by a passing guard. Why the sudden drop in decibels? Because in many towns and charters the evening was considered sacred trading time. This was when serious buyers and sellers, those with actual money and fewer children, came out. They wanted peace, clarity, and the ability to hear someone mutter 4 pennies less if you don't sniff it. Historians still debate whether these curfews were more about reducing crime or about curbing merriment. Both seem plausible. Noise meant distraction, and distraction meant pickpockets, quarrels, or worse, unauthorized dancing. And in medieval Europe, nothing was more dangerous than someone twirling unlicensed near a candle stand. You drift past a fire-roasted chestnut stall as the vendor gently hums. A reeve raises an eyebrow but lets it slide. Humming's not banned. unless it turns into full-blown melody. That's a grey area. You imagine a world where whistling after sunset is a ticketable offence, then you realise you're standing in it. Over in the wine lane, several vendors have quieted their banter and adopted a much softer tone. Gone is the morning shouting of best Burgundy in the fair. Now it's more like, if you squint at the label and lower your expectations, the customers don't mind. In fact, they seem to enjoy the peace. The fair feels gentler. You hear a soft chime, a handbell this time. A boy walks past, holding it with both hands, trailing behind a man who appears to be the official noise monitor. Yes, that's a real position. He carries a scroll with complaints logged that day, lute too shrill, dancing goat too rhythmic, and cabbage seller bellowed aggressively. You try not to laugh. That last one feels personal. These curfews vary by region. In parts of France, they were strictly enforced with roving guards who would extinguish torches at the first sign of a fiddle. In some English fairs, only approved musicians could play past dusk, and only if they played soft airs or church-approved tunes. One rogue bagpiper in York reportedly had his pipes confiscated after leading an impromptu jig beside a fish stall. The fish were not amused. You pass by a puppet booth that now resembles a ghost of its former self. The puppeteer stands there silently, wiggling a marionette in the fading torchlight. A child watches, confused. No jokes, no voices, just gentle bobbing. Art or punishment? You're not sure. Suddenly you hear a loud clatter. A barrel of turnips is tipped, causing a minor ruckus. People gasp. Then total stillness. The reeve appears instantly, his boots clicking ominously against the cobblestones. He surveys the scene like a hawk judging an accidental symphony. Noise, accidental, he asks. The vendor nods vigorously. The reeve squints, then slowly disappears back into the dark, like some kind of bureaucratic vampire. You learn that some fairs used sound inspectors, men trained not in law but in acoustics. They patrolled to enforce acceptable volume, a phrase that somehow sounds both medieval and aggressively modern. Too loud? Fine. Too quiet? Suspicious. Just right? Carry on. Goldilocks would thrive here. There's a rumour that at the Saint-Denis fair, a monk once tried to enforce noise limits by walking around with a literal measuring stick. Anyone shouting louder than the stick's length was deemed disruptive. You wonder how he held up in court. Your Honour, his decibel range clearly exceeded my rod. Probably didn't end well. You pass two vendors mid-haggle, whispering furiously. 6 pence, hisses one. 5, breathes the other, and a dried plum. Deal. A handshake follows. It's the quietest deal you've ever witnessed, and somehow the most tense. You half expect a hush violation patrol to pounce. The rule has one major exception: the closing bell. When it rings, all bets are off. The final horn or bell marking the end of day trading is allowed to be loud, theatrical, and obnoxiously grand. One fair in Flanders even employed an elderly man whose job was to shout "fair closed" while banging a pan. He was reportedly adored. Until then, however, you're in the lull. The sweet, murky limbo of low tones and soft trades. You pass by a stall selling feathers, pillow stuffing, not quills, and notice the vendor has hung a sign, "Quiet down in the county. No yelling necessary." Clever. The mood is different now. Traders slow down. Some offer soft samples, cheese cubes held out on slivers of bark, slices of bread gently fanned out like playing cards. Nobody's yelling about bargains. They're whispering about them. A group of young apprentices sit cross-legged in a circle, quietly practicing jokes that won't get them fined. "What did the blacksmith say to the baker?" one mutters. "You need some iron in your buns." They all giggle into their tunics. You resist joining in, and just as your eyes adjust to the flickering torchlight, you realise something. The fair feels magical this way, muffled, measured, like it's settling into its own sleepy rhythm. No noise, no chaos, just murmurs, soft footsteps, and the distant jingle of someone quietly trying to sell a goat. The stillness of the noise curfew fades gently behind you as you follow a narrow path lit by amber torchlight. Up ahead, something catches your eye. A cluster of figures milling around beneath a hastily painted sign that reads, "Hiring Lane, Mop Fair Today." And just like that, you've stumbled into one of the strangest corners of the medieval market world, where labourers advertise their availability using objects, outfits, and in one case a dead chicken. This is the Mop Fair, and it's less about mops than you'd think, though yes, there are a lot of actual mops here too. You step into the gathering and notice that no one's selling goods. Instead, they're selling themselves, or rather their skills. Men and women line the path holding tools, props, and symbols of their trade. One woman wears a necklace of garlic cloves. She's a cook. A boy waves a shepherd's crook taller than he is. A man wearing a smock covered in soot holds a bent pair of tongs. Blacksmith's mate, he grunts proudly. The system is bizarrely visual. Can't read? Doesn't matter. Want to hire a weaver? Look for someone with a scrap of loom thread tied to their cap. Need a dairymaid? Find the girl holding a butter paddle. Even labourers without tools improvise. One farmhand has tied a carrot to his belt. You try not to laugh. The term mop fair comes from the practice of workers carrying a mop head or brush to signify they're seeking employment. It began as a seasonal hiring event, often after harvest, but eventually became a staple feature at major fairs. You marvel at how something as mundane as job interviews somehow turned into a theatrical parade of props and passive-aggressive staring. You pass a group of potential employers surveying a line of girls holding pails. "That one spilled milk last time," one whispers, but she sings while she churns. The other says. You feel like you've wandered into a medieval HR department with more mud and fewer apologies. Historians still debate whether these fairs empowered workers or simply reinforced a rigid labour structure. On the one hand, workers could shop around for better employers. On the other hand, you just watched a grown man get rejected for having suspiciously clean hands. Never trust a ploughman who's not dirty, someone mutters nearby. And yes, the dead chicken guy is real. He claims to be a gamekeeper. Whether the chicken was part of the job or just today's lunch remains unclear. You stop to chat with a young woman holding a feather duster. "Chambermaid," she says simply. Looking for a place with fewer stairs than last year. She's already had 4 offers, but she's holding out for one that includes afternoon breaks and not too many screaming children. You wish her luck. The process is oddly formal. Once an employer and worker agree, a coin is handed over, not as payment, but as a symbol of agreement. It's called a fasten penny, and it binds both parties to the deal. After that, the worker is hired for the year, though they usually start with a trial week, like a very muddy probation period. One curious rule: the moment you accept the fasten penny, you must remove your trade symbol. So as you watch, the young man accepts a coin from a farmer and ceremoniously unties a bundle of straw from his belt. He's no longer advertising, he's taken. You find this oddly poetic, like watching someone unpin their available badge at a dance. A scribe standing nearby tells you that in some towns, mop fairs were the only legal way to hire certain types of workers. Contracts made outside of them weren't recognized. Others allowed hiring year-round but taxed employers who didn't use the fair. Bureaucracy loves a good party, he says, sipping something suspiciously frothy from a flask. Not everyone at the mop fair is eager. One elderly man with a spade leans against a post, looking thoroughly uninterested. "I'm only here 'cause my niece said I snore too loud to stay another winter," he says. "If I get hired, I'm asking for double stew." You're tempted to hire him on principle. You wander into the livestock corner, where animal keepers are applying for jobs too. One woman has painted a pig on her apron. Another is holding a small, very sleepy goat. A lad with a straw hat walks around shouting, "I'm good with chickens. Chickens love me." To prove it, he clucks. Several chickens look mildly intrigued. There's a festive air to the whole thing. though beneath it lies tension. The stakes are real. If you don't get hired, you might not eat consistently for the winter. If you hire the wrong worker, you're stuck with laziness, theft, or worse, dramatic sighing during every chore. A nearby board lists some rules. No offers may be revoked after the fastened penny is given. No symbols may be worn once a deal is made. No fighting over workers in front of the ale stalls. You assume that last one is a recent addition. You spot a tiny boy holding a thimble and standing very straight. A tailor's apprentice, maybe. He waves at you. You wave back. A tall, serious-looking woman offers him a coin, which he accepts solemnly before removing his thimble and tucking it into a pocket with reverence. A career begins. You feel oddly proud. The sun dips further, casting long shadows across the lane. The fair glows with lanterns now, flickering against banners and faces alike. The mock fair is winding down. Most have been chosen. A few linger, hopeful. Others drift toward the food tents, hopeful in a different way. You walk past the last of the booths where a single man still holds a sign. Willing to work, knows a bit about ferrets. No one's approached yet. You wish him luck, silently. And as you step back onto the main fair path, the sounds of quiet commerce returning, you realize you've just witnessed something utterly medieval and deeply human. The intersection of economy, identity, and a mop head. Your stomach growls, loudly, possibly loud enough to break the curfew rules, but you wave an apologetic hand at a passing reeve and continue sniffing the air like a bloodhound on a very personal mission. There's a thick scent of something roasted, something baked, and something suspiciously fermented. Congratulations, you've found the food and drink section of the fair. Now, you might think medieval fairs were all tankards of ale and giant turkey legs, and sure, there's some of that. But what most people don't know is that there were rules here too. Strict, weird, and occasionally hilarious rules governing what you could eat, what you could drink, and exactly how many people had to inspect your pie before it could be sold. You drift toward a tent offering fair-approved pottage, a sort of chunky stew that looks like it could double as mortar. The vendor smiles warmly, her badge shining proudly. All ingredients inspected this morning, she declares. You ask what's in it, she replies. Whatever was left from yesterday, but inspected today. You appreciate the honesty. Food at fairs wasn't just food. It was a public health experiment waiting to happen. That's why many towns had appointed food tasters. These brave souls, usually unpaid, would sample meat, bread, cheese, and ale before it went on sale to the masses. It was a job with two outcomes: popularity or dysentery. One such taster, you learn, is currently recovering from a questionable venison pasty. His replacement, a teen with the enthusiasm of someone who's never eaten a cold eel sandwich, is now chewing grimly through a sausage roll. You salute his courage from a distance. Historians still argue whether the food rules at fairs were genuinely about safety or just another excuse to collect fees and impose fines. Probably both. At one famous fair in Norwich, a meat vendor was fined for selling sausages of suspicious length. No one ever defined what length was suspicious. It simply was. You pause at a bread stall. The loaves are round, dense, and smell faintly of barley and ambition. The seller gestures to a small sign, conforms to a size of bread. You nod approvingly. That regulation, passed in England in the 13th century, set strict guidelines for the size and cost of loaves depending on grain prices. Too small? You got fined. Too light? You might be pilloried, which is like getting publicly unfriended. But with stocks and cabbage, the seller slices off a piece and hands it to you. It's crunchy, in a way that bread should not be. Toothsome, she says proudly. You chew slowly, nodding diplomatically. Further down, the ale stands hum with activity. But don't be fooled. This isn't a lawless beer-soaked riot. The sale of alcohol at fairs was closely monitored. Each vendor had to register their barrels, label their strength, and sometimes water it down to meet ale of average strength standards. One enterprising brewer offers 3 kinds of ale: soft ale, barely fermented, gentle ale, somewhat drinkable, and memory loss, self-explanatory. You ask for a small cup of gentle. It's tangy, surprisingly cold, and mercifully free of floating surprises. Nearby, a wine merchant is furiously arguing with a reeve. Apparently, his wine has been deemed too enthusiastic. Translation: someone fell over after 2 sips, and now he's being fined for exceeding the approved strength. He protests that it was the man's own enthusiasm, not the wine's. The reeve is unmoved. The quality inspectors wear green sashes and carry small pouches of tasting salts, tiny knives, and bizarrely a feather. You ask one what it's for. Poking cheese, she replies. You'd be amazed what people hide in cheese. You don't ask for further examples. You spot a fishmonger hawking dried cod. His badge says Salthouse approved, which makes you think the fish may have been dried sometime last century. He offers you a free sniff. You decline. Curiously, some fairs even had zoning rules for food. Meat vendors couldn't be near the candle stalls. Bakeries were banned from setting up beside animals, and all dairy sellers had to be at least 1 full wagon length from latrines. You're comforted by the logic, but still don't buy the cheese. At a pie stand, you learn that pie lids must be sealed properly, or else be labelled open tarts. One vendor was fined last year for ambiguous crust work. She now overcompensates by soldering her pies shut with what looks like edible glue. You buy a small one labelled beef and choose not to question the punctuation. For those with deeper pockets, there are luxury booths, sugar plums, dates, almonds, candied rose petals, even dried oranges. These imports are taxed heavily and displayed under tiny cloth awnings, like precious jewels. A Flemish merchant sells candied ginger for the price of a small goat. You buy a single sliver. It burns your tongue in the most delightful way. Children swarm around the sweetwater stalls, which offer thin syrups flavoured with mint or fruit. Not quite juice, not quite potion. One girl sips a cup of raspberry water and declares it less awful than last year. High praise. You pass by a group of monks selling holy sops bread soaked in wine, blessed by the local abbot, and reportedly good for the soul and digestion. You buy one. It tastes like guilt and raisins. Then there's the meat. Oh, the meat. Spit roasted, salted, stewed, jellied meat in every form, on every surface. But here too there are rules. No unlicensed slaughtering within the fairgrounds. No offal sales before midday. No goose fat cooking fires near flammable tents. A man once cooked a pig too close to the scroll stall and singed 2 important documents. Ever since, roast zones are strictly enforced. You round out your meal with a flagon of warm, herbed cider from a very kind woman who insists on blessing your cup. You take a sip, and for a moment, everything fades. Noise, bustle, reeves and rules. Just you, a mild buzz, and the slow drift of roast smoke curling into a deepening dusk. You're feeling rather pleased with yourself now, full belly, cider in hand, and only 2 new stains on your tunic. But as you stroll toward the next stretch of market stalls, something shifts in the air. You catch the sound of unfamiliar languages flowing, clipped, melodic, all layered over the usual marketplace hum. The signs above the stalls look different too, brighter paint, finer lettering, unfamiliar symbols. You've wandered into the foreign merchant quarter, a fair within the fair with its own rules, privileges and delicate tensions. These aren't your average turnip vendors. These are traders from Genoa, Bruges, Lubeck, Constantinople, places you've only heard whispered in tavern tales or mumbled by tired monks. Their goods shimmer, silk dyed in impossible shades, spices that make your nose itch just from passing, coins that don't even look real. You're not in Kansas anymore, or Kent, or wherever this fair is. The most striking thing, they're allowed to be here, legally, formally, and sometimes under better conditions than the local merchants. You pause in front of a Flemish cloth booth. The vendor, impeccably dressed and smiling with just the right amount of smug, offers you a sample to touch. It's smooth as cream and dyed a blue so deep it feels like falling into the sky. Woad, you ask. He scoffs. Indigo, Real, Persian, you pretend you know the difference. Foreign merchants didn't just show up. They were often invited. Town councils and noble patrons would send out charters and contracts promising fair treatment, safe passage, tax breaks, and stall space in exchange for their exotic wares and, let's be honest, their tax money. These traders brought wealth, prestige, and the kind of luxury goods that made local lords feel fancier than they were. Historians still argue whether these invitations fostered healthy cosmopolitanism or simmering resentment. You watch a local wool merchant glaring at a Venetian selling glass beads, and you'd guess a little of both. Many foreign traders had their own laws, at least within their quarter. Disputes were settled by their own elders or consuls. Some even carried letters of protection from foreign rulers, which they brandished like magical scrolls whenever a reeve got too nosy. You pass a Genoese spice store where 3 officials are sniffing nutmeg with professional intensity. The merchant calmly unrolls a parchment stamped with 3 seals, royal, papal, and something with a fish on it. All paid, all pure, all permitted, he says. The reeves step back. But these privileges weren't just legal. They were architectural. Some fairs gave foreign merchants permanent booths, sometimes even tiny walled enclaves within the fairground. The champagne fairs in France were famous for this. Italian merchants had their own stone buildings, guards, and even storage vaults. You think of them as early luxury pop-ups, but with more scrolls and fewer velvet ropes. You chat with a translator, a young woman fluent in 4 languages, all of which she learned by listening. I just stand here and explain that no, he's not insulting your mother. He's haggling. She laughs. Most fights are just bad grammar. Not everything is peaceful. You spot a small crowd gathered around a French bookseller and a German merchant arguing loudly over the use of a stall. Apparently there's been a boundary violation, half a tent peg over the line. A mediator is summoned, and a chalk line is drawn across the store, like a demilitarized zone. Both men nod solemnly. Problem solved. Foreign merchants also face strict curfews, sometimes forced to pack up earlier, or assigned separate storage areas to prevent theft or accidental mingling. You pass a warehouse guarded by 2 enormous men who say nothing but crack their knuckles in alternating rhythm. You take the long way around. Some of the fair's oddest rules only applied to foreigners. At one English fair, Italian bankers had to wear a red feather in their caps to distinguish them. At another, Eastern traders were banned from selling painted fruit, though no one could agree on what that meant. One seller got fined for offering apples with an unusually glossy sheen. You stop at a booth selling small clay bottles filled with rosewater. The merchant bows slightly. For scent, or for headaches, or both. You buy one. He wraps it in velvet, and thanks you in a language you don't know, but somehow understand. Trade is a kind of shared poetry, you think. Then nearly walk into a goat. There's a scholarly debate about whether foreign merchants undermined local economies or helped fuel them, but from your point of view, they bring a liveliness to the fair that wouldn't exist without them. The colours are brighter here. The smells are sharper. The risks slightly higher. You watch a deal unfold between a Londoner and a trader from Aragon. Neither speaks the other's language. A child stands between them, translating with hand gestures and farm animal impressions. It works. A coin changes hands. A bolt of silk is passed. They nod, satisfied. And then there's the food. Oh, the food. You find olives, saffron buns, honeyed almonds, wine that makes your eyebrows twitch, and something pickled in vinegar and ambition. You try it. Your tongue regrets it, but your heart doesn't. You take one last stroll through the foreign quarter, watching deals struck, goods admired, papers unfurled. There's a sense of theatre here, every transaction performed with a little flair, a little drama, and yet beneath it all is a deep current of trust, carefully maintained by rules, charters, guards, and the ever-watchful gaze of the fair authorities. As you exit the lane, you pass a tired merchant wrapping up his wares. He sees your look of curiosity and offers a single pearl button. "Gift," he says. "For luck." You take it. It gleams like a full moon in your palm. In this corner of the fair, borders blur, languages bend, coins clink like conversation, and somehow it all works. You've spent most of the day drifting through stalls and stories, brushing elbows with candle makers and spice traders, apprentices and reeves, poets and pie smugglers. But now something shifts. A new energy hums in the fairground air, sharper, more alert. People glance over their shoulders a little more often. Merchants begin to close money boxes more tightly. You sense it before you see it. The market guards have arrived. They don't wear uniforms in the way modern police do. No gleaming helmets or crisp lines, but you can spot them instantly. Heavy cloaks, padded jerkins, short swords at their sides, and that slow casual swagger that says, I can legally hit you with a stick if necessary. Their boots are caked with fairground dust. Their eyes are tired. Their expressions are carved from wood. The guards are everywhere now, leaning against tent poles, wandering between wagons, peeking under tables. One is quietly speaking to a cheese merchant, who appears to be hiding something suspicious beneath his stall. The guard bends down, lifts a cloth, and pulls out a lute. The merchant shrugs. It's not mine. The guard raises an eyebrow and walks on. Medieval market guards weren't just brawlers. They were also inspectors, enforcers, and walking reminders that rules matter, even among roasted pigs and novelty candles. Most fairs appointed guards from among the townsfolk, usually men with some military background or at the very least broad shoulders and few questions. Their job? Maintain order, prevent theft, enforce tolls, break up fights, and occasionally, as you learn firsthand, search suspicious sacks. A man ahead of you is stopped with a heavy burlap bag slung over his back. What's inside? The guard asks. Just onions, the man mutters. The guard frowns. Onions don't jingle. He opens the bag. Sure enough, nestled under a layer of pungent bulbs, are 6 pewter mugs and a carved dice cup. Confiscated. The onions get to stay. There's a scholarly debate over whether market guards were protectors of peace or tools of state control. Either way, their presence was constant, especially in the evening hours when tempers ran high and purses grew heavy. You're told by a vendor that the real trouble begins when the sun drops low and the ale grows bold. You pass a small group of guards gathered near a makeshift booth. One is sharpening a dagger while another eats an apple with theatrical slowness. Their eyes scan constantly, even while chatting. They're looking for signs, sudden movements, darting eyes, a nervous shuffle. They miss nothing, except the man currently slipping a roll of dyed thread into his sleeve 2 stalls over. You raise your eyebrows, so do they, but no one moves. A quiet game. The thief disappears into the crowd. One guard sighs. He'll trade it for a sausage and come back tomorrow. They've seen it all before. Some guards carry written permits that allow them to inspect goods, seize contraband, and detain rowdy visitors. Others don't bother with paper, just a firm voice and a heavy stick. One carries a wooden pole with notches carved along its side. One for every scuffle, he says proudly. Or maybe it's just for measuring fish. I forget. You pass a stall selling trinkets and hear a sudden crash. A child has knocked over a basket of pewter brooches. The vendor panics, accusing the child of thievery. A guard appears almost instantly. He kneels, talks to the child gently, inspects the fallen wares, then pats the child's head and tells the vendor to calm your beard. Conflict diffused. It's not all tension and inspections, though. Guards also act as lost and found coordinators, message runners, and on one occasion you witness impromptu marriage counsellors. A couple arguing over the price of dried plums is gently separated by a guard who recommends they take a lap before discussing dried fruit again. In some regions, like Flanders or the Low Countries, fairs had elite guards known as Watchmen of the Bell. They were appointed by city councils, wore special insignias, and responded to bell signals from towers marking curfew, theft, or fire. You ask if this fair has anything similar. We have Dave, one reeve says, gesturing to a man asleep in a chair beside a goat. He rings a bell when he wakes up, sometimes on purpose. You pass a corner where guards have set up a small holding tent, just canvas and rope, but imposing enough. Inside sits a man who tried to sell spoiled eel under the label smoked delicacy. A child walks past, holding his nose. The eel guy shrugs. It's here you notice the ledger, a large book resting on a crate, guarded like treasure. It's the guard record, fines, warnings, banned individuals. One page reads, Ostrich the flatulent, warned for disruptive dancing. Elena of Bridgeford, fined for false sausage labelling. Unknown boy with pigeon, detained, later released. Pigeon uncooperative. The record keeper, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers, tells you that the ledger is read aloud at the final council meeting of the fair. Names are announced. Offences are laughed at. Repeat offenders may be barred from next year's festivities. It's a strange form of justice. Half punishment, half entertainment. You ask if the guards ever lose control of the crowd. Sometimes, one says, but mostly, people respect the stick. He taps his cudgel, worn smooth from years of calm enforcement. There's something oddly comforting about their presence. You feel safer knowing someone is keeping the pickpockets in check, and the cheese smugglers honest. The fair may be muddy and chaotic, but the guards are its spine, gruff, unamused, and entirely necessary. As you move away from the guard cluster, a merchant taps your arm. Watch your pouch, he warns. They've caught 2 cut purses today. The third one's still learning. You nod. Your coin purse has survived another chapter. The sun dips lower. Torches are lit. The fair hums with quieter energy now. The guards move into deeper shadows, watching, waiting, blending in. You catch one sharing bread with a stray dog. And as you walk on, you hear the faint jingle of chainmail behind you. A quiet reminder. The rules are still in place, even when the stars come out. Evening deepens into that dusky golden moment when the fair begins to glow. Lanterns flicker to life. Fires are stoked. Shadows stretch long like sleepy cats. And somewhere a flute tries its best to stay in tune. You turn a corner and stumble into what looks like a small procession, led by a priest clutching a book the size of a roast goose and a candle taller than most children. You've wandered straight into the intersection of fair and faith, and here comes the most oddly powerful rule of all, Saints' Day scheduling. This entire fair, every tent, trumpet and turnip, is happening not just because someone thought it was a good week for cabbage sales. No, it's taking place now because the church calendar allowed it, and in many cases, demanded it. Fairs were often scheduled around saints' days, those feast days in honor of local or national religious figures. These were sacred events, full of prayer, procession, and occasionally pickled eel, a strange blend of reverence and revelry. You can almost imagine a medieval monk muttering, "Yes, we'll honour St. Cuthbert right after I buy some shoes and drink suspicious cider." You follow the priest and his small group as they stop at a stone cross in the centre of the fairground. He raises the candle, mumbles a blessing in Latin, and sprinkles holy water on a wheel of cheese. Someone forgot to move. Sacred dairy. Now, you smile. Saints weren't chosen at random. A fair linked to St. Michael might happen near harvest, invoking his role as a protector. A St. Leonard fair was often held in early November. He was the patron saint of prisoners, and oddly, horses. It's possible the horses felt mixed emotions about this. Historians still argue whether Saints' Day scheduling was more about religion or convenience. It's true that tying a fair to a feast day guaranteed attendance. People were already gathering for church. Why not stay for a little bargain hunting? In some towns, saints' bones or relics would be paraded through the fair, blessing the proceedings. You once read of a festival in Bavaria where a toe bone of St. Ursula was kept in a jewelled box and displayed near the pickle stall. Holiness, after all, comes in many forms. You glance at a large board posted near the main tent. It lists permitted days of trade in blocky handwriting. On days dedicated to certain saints, some goods are restricted. You scan the list. No fish sales on St. Peter's Day. Respectful. No dice games on St. Augustine's Day. Predictable. No loud bells on the feast of St. Barbara. Because reasons. A nearby vendor grumbles that last year's fair was cut short because someone miscalculated the lunar feast schedule and accidentally scheduled the opening during a minor fast. Sales were terrible, and the ale was even worse, thinned down to penance levels. These schedules weren't just superstitious, they were legally binding. The church held immense power, and fairs needed clerical blessing to operate. Without it, the fair wasn't just unsanctioned, it was illegal. So if your fair overlapped with a high feast day, especially during Lent, you either had to adjust or face the wrath of both reeves and bishops. And when it rained, the people joked that it was the saints expressing dissatisfaction with pricing or stew quality. A joke, but only just. You overhear a pair of merchants debating whether next year's fair will fall too close to Ascension Thursday. One swears it will be fine. The other claims last time half his customers left early to go light candles. Could have lit them at the fair, he mutters. We had candles. Blessed ones. The other rolls his eyes. The overlap between religion and economics goes deeper than scheduling. Certain stalls near churches couldn't sell goods considered frivolous, which apparently included dice, puppets, and love potions. A puppet vendor tells you she was once chased away by a deacon for having a marionette that winked too suggestively. She's toned it down since the puppet now only nods. You pass a tent with a banner declaring shriven before sale, holy goods only. Inside are relics, pilgrim badges, rosaries, and small vials of something labelled Tears of St. Clement. You're fairly certain it's rainwater. Still, business is brisk. A friar with a booming voice is offering blessings for stall success. 5 pennies and your bread won't burn this week, he promises. A vendor nearby mutters, I'll risk the burn. You slip him a coin anyway, just in case. There's also a curious mid-fair mass that some charters required. If you're selling within earshot of the bell tower, you're expected to attend or at least stop trading while the service happens. You witness one such moment now. A bell chimes and like magic, the noise dies. People bow their heads. Even the cheesemonger stops slicing. Reverence in the midst of haggling. Oddly beautiful. In some towns, processions would weave through the fair to re-sanctify the space every evening. You catch the tail end of one now. A monk swinging incense, followed by children in smocks carrying palm fronds and sneaking bites of plum tarts. Balance, as always. One scholar noted that fairs were the only place where salvation and sausages were sold side by side. You think that's fair. Another described them as temporary heavens with muddy feet. That also tracks. And yet, the rules mattered. A merchant caught selling during Mass could be fined. A performer who mocked a saint's name might be whipped. One infamous juggler in York had his license revoked for impersonating Saint Balthazar while juggling onions. You ask what that even looked like. No one knows, but the onions were confiscated. As twilight descends, you watch the last candles of the procession flicker out. The priest nods to a nearby merchant who promptly opens a stall selling fried fish. It's after Vespers, he says with a grin. The Lord's fine with it now. And so the rhythm continues. Faith and commerce, incense and sausages, parchment and prayers. You walk on, the distant smell of frankincense mingling with garlic. Above you, the stars begin to appear like saints quietly watching from the rafters of the sky. The scent hits you before the sound does. A warm, hay-heavy breeze carrying with it the unmistakable perfume of livestock, manure, musk, and something faintly noble. You round a corner and there they are. Cows, sheep, pigs, goats, even a few haughty geese. All lined up, tied down or milling about with the calm resignation of animals used to being gawked at by humans with questionable footwear. You've entered the livestock section, and fair warning, it's less petting zoo, more bureaucratic barnyard. Animals weren't just sold at medieval fairs. They were registered, taxed, inspected, and occasionally arrested. Okay, maybe not arrested in the modern sense, but they could definitely get someone fined. Welcome to the world of animal regulations, where even your donkey needs paperwork. The first thing you notice is a booth with a sign that reads, Livestock Tally Office. All beasts must be counted. A clerk sits behind a table, quill in hand, recording arrivals in a ledger thicker than a bishop's eyebrow. A merchant leads up a small herd of sheep. You watch as a nose tally is performed. That's the technical term. They count the animals' noses, not legs or tails. A perfectly logical system, until you meet a pig with a rather convincing tree branch lodged in its snout. It's a long day for the clerk. Historians still argue whether these counts were primarily for taxation or disease control, likely both. A cow brought from outside the county might carry parasites, hoof rot, or worse foreign pricing strategies. Local lords wanted to know what was arriving, in what condition, and how much coin it was worth. The entry tax for animals was usually based on species and number. A cow might cost 4 pence, a goat 2, a swan highly variable. You spot one now looking disdainfully at a bucket of turnips. The reeve in charge mutters, "He's not even for sale, just came to judge." Beyond the numbers, there are rules of presentation. All animals must be tethered, all sales must be declared, all droppings must be shovelled at earliest convenience. You pass a shovel-wielding boy with a haunted look in his eyes. He nods at you. You nod back, solemnly. A group of horse merchants stands in a circle, inspecting a stallion like it's a piece of rare sculpture. One pulls back its lip to examine the teeth. Another runs a hand down its flank. A third just stares at the hooves and hums. Apparently, hoof humming is a diagnostic tool, or a superstition, or both. You wander into the pig section, and chaos immediately greets you. One has escaped. A vendor chases it, shouting, "Stop that swine." He's unlicensed. The pig dodges expertly, glancing back with what you're sure is smug defiance. Eventually, it's corralled by 2 guards, a cart and an extremely unhelpful dog. Pigs were notoriously tricky at fairs, which is why some charters required them to be muzzled and escorted. You spot a pair of pigs tied together with a garland of daisies, festive and functional. Next comes the oxen lane. Massive beasts, with eyes like melted chocolate and patience forged in centuries of ploughing. You watch as a buyer inspects their hooves, making notes on a wax tablet. One ox sneezes on his sleeve. A nearby child claps. An official walks past holding a branding rod. Not for actual branding, but to verify ownership by checking existing marks. Cattle were often branded or tagged before arrival, and disputes over identical markings were common. In fact, one year, 2 farmers got into a legal brawl over a sheep with an ambiguous backside tattoo. The case is still cited in reeve training sessions. You pass a pen labelled Goat Containment Zone. It's insufficient. Several goats are already outside it, chewing on unattended shoelaces. One tries to sell you a stick. You decline. At the far end, you reach the bird stalls, ducks in crates, chickens in baskets, one proud goose tied to a post and honking like royalty. Poultry sales are governed by even weirder rules. No selling birds by weight, they wriggle too much. All eggs must be inspected for cracks. Roosters may not be advertised via crowing. You don't ask how that last one's enforced. A crowd gathers near a cart, decorated with ribbons. It's a livestock auction, and it's got everything. Fast talkers, curious buyers, and one man who's clearly just here for the shouting. A sheep is held aloft like a prize ham. 1 penny. 2. 2 and a turnip. Someone shouts. The bidding ends with a handshake, a coin, and the buyer giving the sheep a reassuring pat on the head. You're not sure who's more confused, the sheep or the vendor. Some fairs even had animal contests. Best kept pig, fastest chicken, most decorative cow. You come across a goat wearing a velvet cape and a hat made of radish leaves. It wins your personal award for most determined not to be goated. There's a scholarly note in the margins of an old fair ledger that reads, 2 sheep dressed as monks, fined for causing distraction. You want it to be true, you need it to be true. As the light fades, the livestock section grows quieter. Animals settle, buyers make final rounds. The donkey brays into the dusk like a furry bugle. Somewhere, a reeve yawns. You pause at the exit gate, where each beast is checked again, before leaving. A guard counts cows like coins. A child waves goodbye to a goat she clearly bonded with. You almost feel sad. Almost. You glance back at the fairground one last time. Amid the stalls and stalls of shiny things, it's easy to forget that for many, this is the heart of the market. The cows, the pigs, the sneaky chickens, trade with legs and hooves. And as you walk on, the sound of the fair fading behind you, you hear one last distant honk from that judgmental swan. You think it approves. The fair is thinning now. Torches crackle low, their light stretching long and golden across worn canvas and rutted lanes. Booths are closing. Traders yawn behind half-packed carts. The soft murmur of voices replaces the earlier clang of haggling. Even the swan seems to have fallen silent. You slow your pace, breathing in the scent of ashes, wool, and tired satisfaction. It's time to let it all settle. The rules. The curious, fussy, and oddly poetic patchwork of charters, courtrooms, bells, and badges begin to blur together in your memory. They were never just about control. They were about rhythm, structure, predictability in a world of chaos and wandering pigs. A kind of reassurance. Your boots are caked in fairground mud. Your pouch is lighter, your heart oddly heavier, not with sadness, exactly, more with the quiet fullness that comes from having been somewhere, not just in space, but in time. Somewhere nearby, a tired reeve counts lanterns on hooks. A vendor snores behind a barrel of turnip. The goat in the velvet cape is asleep, draped like royalty over a pile of hay. And you? You walk slowly, every step softer now, past the empty stall where Elsie the apprentice weaver once stood, past the bench where the pie-powder court judged a broken spindle, past the chalked line that nearly caused an international silk crisis. These things happened, here, in this strange, gentle little bubble of law and chaos. They'll happen again next year, maybe slightly different, maybe exactly the same. Fairs are like that, fleeting and eternal all at once. Above you, stars emerge one by one. You try to count them, you lose track. That's fine. You pass the gate, now flung open, its guards gone, or asleep. No toll today, you earned your exit. Wind brushes your cheek, cooler now, carrying the faintest hint of burnt sugar and spent laughter. You close your eyes, just for a moment. The rules of the fair fade behind you, like a dream half remembered. You'll try to tell someone later about the goat judge, or the pie thief, or the wool merchant's trial by flute. They won't believe you, but you'll smile anyway. And somewhere deep inside you'll remember the sound of the opening trumpet, the one that said, "You are here, you are part of this." And now, you are not.